Hi. So like she said, I'm CoinDesk reporter Lee Quinn, and I'm really lucky today that we get to talk about DEXs with some of the people who have really wide experience across the space. We have Ethan Fast, who's CTO of Nash. We have Ryan Fox, who's a coordinator at BitShares. And we have Steve Jane, who is a contributor to Bisq. And Ethan, can you start us off by describing where Nash is centralized and where it is not centralized or less centralized?
Sure. So just to kind of give a high level first, Nash is a platform that allows you to trade and manage digital assets while maintaining control of your funds. So more than a decentralized exchange, but that's obviously what we're going to talk about today. So in terms of where it's centralized and decentralized, we have basically trading in self-custody of funds is totally decentralized, so people maintain control of their funds throughout the trading process. We achieve this through smart contracts across the blockchains that we support, and then have those interact via state channels with a matching engine. This matching engine itself is not decentralized, but it is distributed, and it's also deterministic. So this means that you can prove that matches happened in a fair way, but isn't a decentralized system itself. And then we have a number of other components, things related to, say, KYC, which are centralized, other things like key management, which are kind of a combination. Right, we store encrypted key data, which obviously we're storing in a centralized system, but you control your keys, right? So that's decentralized as well. So kind of a mix across the rest of the components.
So mostly that you're talking about self-custody is the decentralized aspect, and then there's ways to prove what's going on for the centralized aspects.
Correct, yeah.
How about when it comes to Nash? How do you guys deal with, for example, KYC on your process, and also like permission within the network?
Sure. So the simple thing is we do KYC, right? And to do KYC, you do need some kind of centralized component that's keeping track of who people are and what they're authorized to do across different jurisdictions. In terms of how we deal with that while maintaining a decentralized system, the simple answer is you can have a decentralized system where people control their funds, but also limit sort of how and who uses that system, right? So for example, the matching engine can enforce a limit on a certain person if they're not KYC to a certain level. But that doesn't mean we control their funds. It just means that they're not allowed to place a trade in the system, right? So you can kind of mix these models a bit to get the things that are necessary for regulatory compliance, but also maintain the benefits of sort of self-custody or user control. Yeah, sure. So for us, I would say the sort of self-custody or the user control of funds is the most important thing. I think if you look out at sort of all the problems that we see often in the centralized exchange ecosystem in terms of hacks, in terms of security risks, like that's the big thing that will prevent a lot of these bad things from happening. So that's something we have a lot of focus on. The other thing I would say is that in general, we're trying really hard to make it easy for people to use these decentralized systems, right? So if you think about what it usually takes to use these kinds of things now, you need to understand like public-private key cryptography, on how your keys work, what it means to have a private key, all this stuff. And we're trying to design systems where people get the benefits of owning their keys, but don't necessarily need to understand all of those details about how the system works.
Gotcha, yeah. Ethan, do you have any thoughts about how you design a system with that cross-border context in mind?
Sure, so the short answer is you have to be very careful, like in terms of dealing with regulatory systems and regulators. And so we take a lot of time to make sure that everything we're doing across the jurisdictions that we are going to operate in is okay. And there are a lot of little details that actually change between those things, so it's very important to have legal teams who are well-versed in all these different jurisdictions. In terms of the core user experience, that's kind of a simpler story. I mean, the thing you do is you test with people, you bring in people, you see how they react to your interfaces, to your work, and then you iterate on the basis of what the feedback is they give you.
Awesome. And Ethan, would you like to close us out with your thought on the biggest challenge for sustainability when it comes to DEXs?
Sure. So first, I'd just like to agree with the other two, and Ryan especially. So we're working on the same problem in terms of Bitcoin payment channels, all of that. So I agree that's very important. In terms of how I would frame the biggest challenges in general, I would say that one of the biggest is just user experience and usability. So people still don't really understand how to manage their keys appropriately, and even if they think they do understand, they often do very bad things with those keys that lead them into trouble. So I think solving that is going to be a very big deal before DEXs really take up the kind of lion's share of the volume, let's say, in the market. The second thing I would say is, we've talked about this regulation, so there needs to be more clarity in regulation, and people need to be sort of clear on what needs to be done and actually do that. And the third thing I would say is the performance. So right now, DEXs are largely limited to the sort of time it takes for blocks to be produced on any given blockchain. And this is one thing that we're working on sort of how can you detach that a little bit? How can you make that a lot faster? If you can do that, you get a lot more liquidity. Your user experience gets better for that reason as well.
Awesome.
I assume all your networks or entities require uploading or importing real-time cryptocurrency market price data. How does relying on centralized data sources undermine the decentralized nature of your exchanges? Or does it undermine the decentralized nature of your exchanges?
Yeah, currently the only place that external pricing data touches our system is the volume calculations, which could be exploited, but it's actually a pretty minor security thing. So even if someone fully compromised that, there's pretty limited damage they could do. We're actually looking at other ways to solve that as well, though, through stablecoins that we run that can provide trusted signals.
So I think you guys have barely even touched on the most important problems here, and they are front running and scalability. You began to touch upon scalability at the end, but a bigger problem is front running. So if the order book is open and every single trade is front run, it doesn't matter how private it is or how decentralized it is, the entire enterprise is dead. Same thing with scalability. If 100 daily active users on a DEX on Ethereum, this is a dead enterprise. This is not a sign of success. So could each of you describe how your platforms plan to solve the problems of front running and scalability, and or how you think this will evolve in the future?
Yeah, I would just add that because we have a fair amount of control over our distributed matching engine system, this is largely not a problem for us. The main person you have to worry about is us, ourselves, and we try to prevent that through, again, the sort of determinism of the system and the sort of the ability for you to go back and inspect what trades actually happened.
So I think this is important and it was skipped over, but what is the process for getting a token listed on each of these platforms?
So for us, we require a legal opinion from the people who want us to list their token. And the reason for this is, say, if we're operating in the US, as we plan to do, and you have a token on our system that's a security, well, that's a big problem. We're not allowed to trade securities in the US. EtherDelta ran into a similar issue not so long ago. So we take that part of it very seriously, but beyond that, we don't have too much in terms of a formal listing process.
Does that make Dash not a true decentralized exchange? I know that, or Nash, I should say.
These are decentralized exchanges, right? These are exchanges that are going towards decentralization.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Decentralization is not something we actually reach.
We say self-custody of funds, and that's the most important thing. You control your funds. Whether or not you can use the exchange is a separate issue.
Gotcha.
Last question?
This is mainly for Ethan. You said that your matching engine was deterministic and also distributed system. I assume that's to be provably fair. But it is a distributed system. What kind of hardware is needed to verify the behavior of this system? Is it going to need to be something with the same amount of processing power as this distributed system? I mean, if you were to verify the behavior of Google, you would need a data center. Is this similar with Nash?
Yeah, this is a really great question. So we're working on ways to make that easier. So right now, the naive way that you would verify this is you would take one of the nodes in our distributed system, you'd run it over all the data which would have been published publicly. That would obviously take forever, and then you would verify that the trades were fair. This cannot be the final solution. So we're looking at ways of kind of breaking that down so that we can almost have snapshots at any given point in time. So up to, say, snapshot X, you can be assured that it was trusted because we had this sort of iterative trust. It's much like chaining out the trust, right? So if you hash it at a certain time and then you check the delta from that hash, so there's ways of solving this. We're just still working on what the best way is right now.